Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Do I Have Full Chain of Custody? Can I Label? Today's presentation will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants and also will be posted on the Hub. We will have a Q&A portion throughout the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. Now on to Trini with Textile Exchange. Trini?
Thank you, Rose, and hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Trini Gantner. I'm the Standards Manager at Textile Exchange's Standards team. And with me today is my colleague, Stephanie Pokorski, Standards Claims Manager, and my colleague, Taylor Jones, our Standards Coordinator. In today's webinar, we are going to kick off with an intro to Textile Exchange and our standards, and then begin the webinar with an overview over the chain of custody, to then dive deeper into claims and labeling and what kind of claims you can make. We will conclude the webinar with a Q&A session, so I encourage you to type in your questions as they come up into the Q&A box you see at the bottom of your screen. As a little bit of background about us, Textile Exchange is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was founded in 2002. And we initially had a focus on cotton when we were first founded, but as we matured over the years, we also began to focus on different fibers and opportunities. And when we look at our mission and vision and strategy, our overall goal is to inspire and equip people to accelerate the adoption of preferred fibers in the textile supply chain. And you may have seen our recent strategy revision, our Climate Plus strategy. And within that strategy, our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by the year 2030. And we are looking to reduce those in the pre-spinning phase. Here's an overview of our Climate Plus strategy. And again, the vision is to have reduced the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 with a focus on the pre-spinning phase. We are a global team here at Textile Exchange with a little over 50 team members across the world. And I am going to give you a quick overview about our standards and assurance team. We started out as a fairly small team and have growing very, very quickly over the past couple of years. And as you can see, we are scattered throughout the world with representation in Europe, in North America, in Costa Rica. We have 2 employees in Costa Rica and India. And yeah. My name is Trini. You can see me here. I'm based in Seattle, Washington, United States. Now let's look at our standards. So Textile Exchange owns 8 standards total that you can see here. We have the content claim standard, which is the chain of custody standard for all of our existing standards. We also have the OCS, which is focused on organically grown content. So you can make an organic claim if you're certified to the OCS. We also have 2 standards that focus around recycled. The first one is the Global Recycled Standard, and the second one is the RCS, the Recycled Claim Standard. And the GRS is a little bit of a higher requirement standard because it also includes processing requirements that the RCS does not have. So it includes additional social, environmental, and chemical criteria. Next, we also have 4 different animal-related standards. We have the Responsible Down Standard that you can see here in light blue. And then you have 3 wool-focused standards, the Responsible Wool Standard, the Responsible Mohair Standard, and the Responsible Alpaca Standard. And the chain of custody system is the foundation for all of the standards that we hold. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the content claim standard as well as chain of custody in general. So when we look at supply chains or reflect around complexity that we often have, it would be very nice if we could just easily trace the source of a t-shirt that we see hanging in a retailer's window. But the reality is really that product travels throughout the supply chain, gets blended, mixed, traded. So it is a really complex system, how the initial source can travel through the supply chain until it ends up in the final t-shirt that hangs in a retailer's window or a brand's window. And the way we maintain chain of custody is by way of scope certificates and transaction certificates. So our chain of custody always begins at the source with a verification of the input material, and then travels all the way to the supply chain up to the brand. And I'll go a little bit more into detail here, but in a nutshell, the scope certificate is issued to a company or an organization that is seeking certification. So upon the successful completion of an audit, that organization has earned its scope certificate. And that is the permission pretty much to trade on a specific standards term. The transaction certificate that you see in orange here above, on the other hand, travels with the product itself through the supply chain. So whenever a product gets sold, a TC has to be applied for, but will be issued by the certification body. And then as the product travels from source to fiber, trade or yarn, and so on, up until the very last step. And the goal of this system is to preserve the identity of the material that has been claimed and to track how it moves through the supply chain. Chain of custody is important for, or there are three main points that I really want to mention why it is important. So the first one is that it really drives real and meaningful change to have a system that begins at the source and go all the way to the brand. The second point is that it develops a common language. And the third point, and that is really important for brands on the end, is that you have a guaranteed way to back up your product claims if you have a full chain of custody. I mentioned the CCS content claim standard. We just have undergone a revision that concluded in July with the release of the new content claim standard 3.0. So our previous version was 2.0, new version, current version is 3.0. And with that new version, we brought out some different changes that are also relevant for how you can make product claims and when you can make them. And that is an area that Stephanie will run us through more. But before we do that, I wanted to go back to some of the changes that we've made going from the old version to the new version. And the first one is that we updated the look and feel of the document itself to align it closer to our existing and other more recently revised Textile Exchange standard. We also created supplemental documents. So usually when you certify to the standard itself, there are a multitude of supplemental documents that are helpful. So in this case, what we did is create a content claim standard user manual, and we also took out all the certification body related requirements that we previously had in the standard and added them to the CCS certification procedures, which is a separate document. And you can find all the different documents. I've anchored it here at the bottom on the CCS landing page. When you are on that page, you can also jump to document library at the end and search by standard. Then you will see all the associated documents within a given standard. The third point is really important. There are changes to brand certification with the release of CCS 3.0. in the sense that brand certification is now required by July 1st of next year if you want to label your product. And I'll get back to my supply chain visual here in a second to talk about that. The fourth point is requiring more of the supply chain, or stricter requirements, if you want to say so, to manage subcontractors within the supply chain. We now require a lot more contracts to be in place. And the last one that I want to mention is changes for trader certification, in the sense that traders without physical possession of the product are no longer required to be certified under the new CCS. And I'm going to go back here to the supply chain visual. So what you see is what remains and what will continue is verification required from the source to the final product up to the brand. So our previous role was the seller in the final business to business transaction has to be certified. And then there were some caveats whether or not they sold direct to the brand or only direct to consumer, excuse me, or on to retailers, for example, so on to another business. With the release of the CCS 3.0, we always require certification up to the brand, regardless whether that brand sells direct to consumer only or on to another retailer. So certification from source to brand come July 1 of next year is mandatory under the new CCS 3.0. New also is what we previously had here, I crossed it out, is that we required a TC between the brand and the retailer, and that is under the new requirements also no longer needed. So back to our original question is, do I have a full chain of custody? Can I label, and when can I label? And the answer is that you can only label your product if a full chain of custody is in place, meaning that every entity along the supply chain of the graphic that I showed before is certified. And the full chain of custody is from the source to the brand level. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Stephanie, who is going to run us through claims and labeling basics. Stephanie?
Thank you, Trini. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I really just wanted to reiterate the point Trini made just a moment ago about the implications on labeling, because I think this is really important. So because the purpose of our standards is to provide the industry with a way to verify sustainability claims from raw material to the final product, having full chain of custody is the only way you are allowed to make product-related claims, including labeling. So you can see here in the diagram again, I've outlined in green and crossed out some of the TCs and SCs here. If you only have partial chain of custody up to, say, the fabric level, as shown in this example, meaning you know that your fabric supplier is certified and has also received certified materials from their yarn vendor by way of a TC, but your garment manufacturer is not certified, then you will not have a fully certified product in the end. And as Trini has mentioned, if you do not have full chain of custody, then the final product is not considered certified and you may not label the product or talk about the product being certified to the standard in any way. Okay, so now that that information is a little more clear, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I'd like to start by giving a brief introduction to our Textile Exchange Standards Claims Policy. This is the document that will describe to you what types of claims are allowed to be made about our standards, who can make them, and what the rules are for making them. So as you can see here, there are 4 different categories of claims about our standards you may make. And within the document, we have provided general guidelines, which outline all of those rules and requirements for making those types of claims. And we've also offered allowed language. So this is scripted allowed language that tells you exactly what you can say about your relationship with that type of claim. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's just a bit more of a holistic look at all of those categories of different claims. I'll touch on each of these a bit throughout the webinar, but for now, if you go to the next slide. The main focus for now is on the assured claims category, and specifically the product-related claim type. So assured claims, you may or may not have heard this term before, but essentially these are the type of claims that result from an assurance process against one of our standards. So these claims are verified by CBs, and these types of claims refer to a product, a process, a business, or a service that has been certified to be in conformity with one of our standards. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so product-related claims are used to show that a product or a line or category of products are certified or contain certified content. As I mentioned before, they're also linked to an assurance process. So they're certified by a certification body, they're approved by a certification body, and special care really needs to be taken to ensure that these type of claims are true, accurate, and not misleading. So product-related claims can appear on or off product. So labeling your product with a hang tag or adding a sewn-in label, care label of any sort is an example of a product-related claim. Off-product related claims can be online product descriptions, catalog product descriptions, or really any point of sale marketing where you're talking about a product being certified to the standard. So just keep in mind that when we say product-related claims, that does mean labeling. That includes labeling or really anywhere else you're mentioning a product. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so I just wanted to go through some of the most common questions that we get about labeling. And as we go through these questions, we'll learn a little bit more about the basics and the requirements for labeling. So the number one question we get is, can I label? And it's important to know that we have a few different eligibility criteria that you need to meet before you can label a product. So the first one is that the product or the claimed component. So if you're talking about the outer shell of a jacket or the upper part of a sneaker, if those are certified, they need to meet the minimum content and blending requirements for the standard. So you can see them all there. There's different requirements for each standard, whether it's OCS blended or OCS 100, the RDS, RWS, etc. Next slide. So the second piece of eligibility criteria is the chain of custody requirement. So on the left-hand side, you can see our current requirement is following CCS 2.0. This training was just talking about. So this is where certification is required up to the seller in the last business-to-business transaction. And you can see in that diagram there that the orange outline highlights every part of the supply chain that comes before the final business, before it goes to the consumer. So that generally would be the brand or the garment manufacturer. However, on the right-hand side, you can see with CCS 3.0, when that becomes mandatory in 2022, certification will be required up to the brand. So that means if they're certified, all brands and retailers will qualify for making product-related claims. They'll be able to label their products. Next slide, please. You can click one more time. Thanks. Okay, so this is just another way of looking at whether or not you meet that eligibility criteria. These diagrams are all in the standards claims policy that I was just talking about at the start of my presentation. So you can see on the left-hand side under CCS 2.0, it's a little bit hard to navigate whether or not you meet these requirements. So if you meet the requirements for blending and content percentage, but your company isn't certified, it really depends if your garment manufacturer is certified, your vendor. So it's a little bit of a maze to get through to the end, but you can see with the new version with CCS 3.0 on the right hand side, it's a little bit more straightforward. So if your company is certified, if you're meeting those requirements, then you can label. Okay, so what about retailers? This is an additional question that we get when we're talking about these chain of custody requirements, and the retailers are often at the end of the supply, well, always at the end of the supply chain, and they have different scenarios. So under CCS 3.0, we've defined that retailers who are selling products under their own brand or their private label are considered brands. So in that case, they would, if they'd like to make claims, then certification is required under CCS 3.0. But if a retailer sells only external brands products, then they're not required to be certified for labeling. Okay, next slide. So the next question is, do I need approval for this claim? And you can go to the next slide. So here just shows the different scenarios, different types of claims that may be made and whether or not you need approval. So if I want to label my products, as we've been talking about, according to the standard, or just talk about my product certification to any of the standards in any way on a product page, online, in any kind of marketing, then I would need approval, and that approval needs to come from a certification body. And also just to keep in mind is that logo use is required when you make these type of claims or label your product. You need to include the percentage of certified material in most cases. And you also need to include the certification body's name and the associated license number. So if you want to just talk about the standards in a general sense, you want to give information about them on your website or in a report, then generally approval is not needed as long as you're not mentioning a product. So again, if you're mentioning a product and talking about the standard and certification, then you would need to look at the above line and you would need approval from a certification body. But as long as you're not mentioning a product, then you can make what we call informational statements. And you can go ahead and make those type of statements whenever you need to. And then finally, if you just want to talk about your commitment to one of the standards, you don't need approval, but we ask that you register your commitment through our online form. The next slide, please. So the follow-up question on the approval is the timeline, the whole process for getting your label or your product-related claim approved. So before you submit any type of claim for approval, the two things that you need to do are read the claims policy to understand the claims policy, understand if you're eligible to label your product or make that type of claim. And after that, you need to contact a certification body. So the certification body may be your direct supplier certification body, or it might be your own if you're already certified. They will send you the claim approval application form, or also known as a label release, as well as for further guidance. For example, the logo use specifications that tell you the colors and the size and application for the logos. So after you get in touch with the CB and you design your artwork following the logo use specifications, you fill in that the application, you can submit that application back to the certification body. You'll await their approval. If they request any changes, then you can make those and send them back to them. And finally, at the end of approximately a 1 to 2 week period, you'll get your approval and you can finally attach your label or publish your claim, wherever that might be, online or in a catalog, etc. So the other thing to keep in mind here is that any labels or hang tags are only able to be physically attached to a product by a certified organization. So if you're a brand who's not certified, then you will need to request that your garment manufacturer or direct vendor attaches those tags for you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a very common question that we get. So in a lot of cases, a brand won't have full chain of custody. So they say, okay, I have partial chain of custody, as we were talking about before, maybe up to the fabric level or the yarn level. And I know that my product does not qualify for labeling. So what can I say, or how can I communicate about the standards and the efforts that we're putting forth? Next slide. So this is what we were looking at before, the different claims categories. And we've taken away the assured claims. You can't make those product related claims. You can't label or talk about certification in any way, but all three of our other claims categories are allowed to be used when you don't have full chain of custody. So you can go to the next slide, please. So our general marketing claims are really centered around your commitments to our standards when you're working towards certification. So this is where we'll ask you to register your commitment in order to start talking about it. We have our registration form there. So if you are initially making a new commitment, or you have an old commitment that you'd like to register and add some updates to, you can do that all through the form. So some of the example claims here are, of course, we commit to sourcing 100% of our wool from RWS certified sources by 2025, or a progress type of claim would be, we've achieved 50% of our goal to source 100% of our down from RDS certified sources by 2025. Next slide. So the second category of claims that you can make when you don't have full chain of custody are the agreement-based claims. And these are really made by organizations who have some form of a written agreement with our organization. So they're not certification related. They're really a good opportunity for any of the companies that are financially supporting on the ground implementation or piloting of any standards. In those cases, they may be allowed to make customized claims about what they're doing to support the standard. Other examples include, if you're part of our international working group for the development or revision of one of our standards, you can talk about that relationship with Textile Exchange if you're a certification body, accreditation body, etc. So the approval for the quote unquote approval for these type of claims is really through the written agreement. So in that agreement, it will describe what you can and cannot say about your relationship with us. And we'll work with you if you need some sort of customized language to talk about. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have the informational statements. These are ready to use messages that describe or kind of define the relevant standard that you're talking about. So it'll say exactly what the RWS does or what the RDS does. And in these cases, we encourage them to be used alongside other claims. So if you're labeling on product or have a labeling on a product webpage, then it would be great if you added more of this informational statements to your claim so that it can help clarify and help people understand what the standards are about. So no approval in this case is needed as long as you have already qualified to make a claim in another category. So if you've registered your commitments or if you have a label or some other claim approved by a certification body, then you can add these informational statements. Okay, next slide, please. And then one of the last questions is, what information do I need to include on my label? You can go to the next slide. And here are the general components of a product related claim or a label. So whether or not it's appearing on or off product, you need to include the standard logo, the percentage of certified content, unless it is 100% RDS, RWS, RMS, or RES certified. And then you need to include the certification body name and the license number. So you can see the example on the right-hand side with the GRS there. Next slide. And here are a few other examples of what correct labeling looks like. You've got another GRS label there on the right-hand side, RWS, and the online version of a RCS blended claim. Next slide. And finally, where can I find more information? So I'd like to call out this new resource that we have. This is a quick guide to product labeling and CCS 3.0. So we've been talking a lot about the changes with CCS 3.0 that are coming forth with brand certification for labeling. So this is a really helpful document that not only outlines just general information about product labeling, but shows exactly what the differences are between CCS 2.0 and CCS 3.0. And you can find this in our document library on our website. You can find it on the standards labeling and claims page or on the hub. And you can go to the next slide. And you can find more resources through the links that we've provided here. In the follow-up, you'll get these presentations with these links, but also to mention that all of these documents appear in our standards document library. Next slide. Okay, and that's it. So if we have any Q&A, we can start answering those. I know Taylor has been moderating the chat. So do we have any questions live?
Hi, Steph. Thanks for that presentation. That was very helpful. Yeah, we have a few great questions coming in, and I have marked them as answering live. So there's some questions that will go to both you and Trini. So I can just start us off in that way. But we had a question come in and I'll read it. And this one is more for Trini on the kind of new brand requirements for the CCS 3.0. But it says, what if you do not label your products? Do you as a brand still need to get certified? Or is it enough if the supply chain is certified up to the garment factory? So if the brand does not want to label, do they still need to be certified?
Yes, thank you for that question. So you only have to get certified if you want to label your product in the end, but no, if you are not certified, and Steph showed that image before, let's say only your manufacturing or the maker of the t-shirt, your garment manufacturer is certified, you are not allowed to make any claims to the specific standard if you are not certified. Said a little bit differently, we don't require you to label if you are certified to our standard, but there are certain requirements how to label if you want to make a claim to our standards.
Thank you, Trini, for that. All right, we have another question about labeling for Steph. If a brand makes a claim such as certified recycled and doesn't mention the GRS or RCS or a different one of our standards, does a brand need to be certified?
So this is a good question, and I should have included this in the presentation actually, because we get this type of question fairly often. And really the answer here is that if you're not mentioning any of our standards, you don't want to make any of the claims relating to our standards that we've been talking about. Of course, you don't need to be certified. You can make the claim recycled certified or certified recycled if you want to, but that is done at your own risk. So that is, in your case, we advise that you check the legal labeling requirements of the country of sale to make sure that you can in fact make that type of claim without any repercussions, but you wouldn't have our standard to back up that type of claim if you're not certified. So otherwise we can't give any guidance in that area.
Great. Thank you for that answer, Steph. We have a few more questions about claims. So Steph, stay tuned. But this new question is, if a brand currently makes product market claims for two different standards, for example, GRS and RDS, does the brand certification cover both standards? And then there's also a separate question about who currently audits for brand certification in the US. And I will include a link to where you can find this on our website in our chat. So be tuned for that.
So I can briefly answer at least the first part of this question, and Trini, you can follow up if you have any other details. But a brand certification, you would need to add the scope for each of those different standards that you're currently making claims to your certification in order to qualify to make claims for those two different standards. Is that correct, Trini?
Yes. So with what we showed earlier with the scope certificate, transaction certificate, if you want to certify to two or more different standards of ours, you would have to make that known to the certification body during the application process to make sure that your audit is scoped correctly. It might be one audit, it might be multiple audits, it depends a little bit, but you will see on our list of certification body, you can filter by standard and you can filter by geographic region, for example. So in this instance, if you're interested in GRS and RDS, you would filter by both standards and then look for a certification body that is authorized to audit both of those standards.
Great. Thank you, Steph and Trini. I have included in the chat to everyone the link to our website where you can find a certification body. And like Trini said, you can filter it out to find one that audits to the standard you're looking for in the place you're looking for, along with other things. This next question is about general marketing claims. And it says, do you follow up with general marketing claims in any way?
Okay, so I think this question is asking if we monitor general marketing claims over time at all, and the answer is yes. In this case, under our new standards claims policy that I've been referring to, general marketing claims, as I mentioned, really center around commitments to our standards. So in order to make these type of claims, you do need to register your commitment with us, and we ask that you do provide progress updates on an annual basis. So if you do have a claim registered, or if you do have a commitment registered with us, we will follow up in a year's time to see where your progress is at and to see what type of claims you're making. In a general sense, we do monitor the marketplace for different claims relating to our standards. So we do follow up on all different types of claims.
Thanks, Steph. Similar to in the same kind of area as that question, there's a question that says for non-assurance claims, do we need to submit to Textile Exchange for approval? If yes, what's the contact?
Okay, so for the three different types of claims that I talked about that weren't assured claims, so for the informational statements, for the agreement-based claims, and for the general marketing commitment claims, as I mentioned, the commitment claims you do need to register. So that is the only thing you need to do. There's no follow-up for approval on the claims that you make. Informational statements, there's no approval required. You just need to follow the allowed language that's outlined in our claims policy. If you're using that, then you're good to go. And as far as agreement-based claims, there would be a sort of approval connected to those, simply just because those are written out in an agreement with Textile Exchange. So we will ensure that you're using the proper language associated with that type of claim.
Great, thank you, Steph. Mm-hmm. This one is about kind of the general auditing process. And it says, how long does an audit take, more specifically a brand audit, and also estimates on cost? And then also along with that question, it asks how often does the brand need to be audited?
I can take that one. That is a great question, and a question we receive frequently. So audits have to occur annually every year. A scope certificate is awarded after each audit, and scope certificates are valid for a year with a little bit of discretion. In terms of timeline and cost, so cost varies by standard. As we've seen earlier, the GRS, for example, has additional social, chemical, and environmental criteria. So the audit length might be longer. The cost varies by standard, and the timeline is also something we cannot give you a definite answer on because it would be between you and the certification body. What we've heard in the past, but that is a little bit of pre-pandemic timelines, is it takes around 6 to 8 weeks to get certified. And the cost for the scope certificate varies by standard, as I mentioned, and varies by your specific situation. But what we've heard for the GRS is around $6,000 to $8,000, and for the US dollars, that is, and for the other standards, somewhere between 2 and 3. But Textile Exchange does not get involved in the pricing, so it would be between you and the certification body. And we always recommend to reach out to multiple certification bodies to get a quote and make sure that you get the offer that works best for your business.
Great, thank you for that information, Trini. I have another question regarding the chain of custody and kind of CCS certification. It says, do you recognize other chain of custody certification schemes such as ISCC? Or is it a requirement that all of the chain of custody needs to be certified under the CCS exclusively?
At this point, we don't accept any equivalent standards to the CCS. We do have a policy on accepting equivalent standards, but when we look across our portfolio of standards, the only one we have an equivalency in place is for the OCS, where we allow GOTS inputs. But for the CCS, there is no equivalent other standard.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Trini. We have a question about auditing again. It says, what is the difference in requirements between a factory being audited and a brand being audited?
So when we go back to the supply chain visual, like from what needs to be followed in terms of requirements, there isn't a difference. The standard is the same for every participant within the supply chain. Yeah, so I guess that's the best answer I can give. In terms of standards and documents and requirements to follow, there is no difference per brand versus a supply chain member, such as a factory or garment manufacturer. You might, as a brand or as a supply chain member, the standard might apply to you in a different way based on your specific criteria, but the standard itself and what you want to prep for the audit is the same.
Great, thank you for that information, Trini. We have another question in about brand certification. It says, if a brand is certified but does not want to use any on-product claims, but is selling to a retailer who wants to use on-product claims, must the brand issue a claims approval form, or can the retailer issue the claims approval form?
I can answer that. So in this case, either of these companies could submit the claims approval form with the certification body. So if the brand and the retailer have a close relationship, they can decide that amongst themselves. This is very similar to currently how a brand or a garment manufacturer may both apply. So a garment manufacturer may apply on behalf of the brand, and in this case, a brand may apply on behalf of the retailer. So either case, the certification body should be able to work with whoever's submitting the claim, as long as the proper certification information is provided.
Great. Thank you so much, Steph, for that answer. It looks like right now our Q&A box is empty. So if anyone has any more questions that came up during this session, please feel free to submit those. We had a lot of great questions come in, and we are happy to keep answering them. And I know Also, Callie is on here and she replied to some via chat. So make sure to look at the answered ones, I guess not chat, the Q&A box. So there are some typed answers too as well that feel free to check out as well.
Hi, Taylor. I just wanted to add one point that I also put in the Q&A about the brand audits versus a factory audit. And there are some requirements in the CCS 3.0 that make it a slightly, I would say, same requirements as Trini mentioned, but different process for the actual audit, where on-site audits for DCs that brands or retailers own are no longer required. And then outgoing TCs from a brand to a retailer will not need to be issued in order to prove chain of custody. There's also some risk assessments that are done to see if a brand would be eligible for a remote audit on your internal control system versus an on-site audit on your actual processing facility. So there are some, I guess, differences in terms of the actual way that the audit is applied, but as Trini mentioned, the requirements and the principles of the standard will still be required to be proven in whatever audit you're assigned.
That's great. Thanks, Callie. And while participants are reflecting on more questions, there's another question that was answered in the chat that I also want to mention here. And it's about mixed supply chains to the recycled claim standard and the global recycled standard. So if a supply chain has RCS and GRS certification, at the end, the question was, can you label to GRS or only RCS? And the response here is that given that the GRS is the more rigorous standard, but not everybody in the supply chain has met or is able to meet those requirements yet, you can only label to the RCS at the end until your supply chain, if that is a desire, everybody in the supply chain is up to the GRS level.
Great, thanks for reiterating that, Trini. We had another question come in during this time that relates to Callie's point about the TCs, but I will answer it because it's a little bit more about the claims here. But it says, if the retailer issues the claims approval form, per the question that was asked earlier, if the brand does not want to make on-product claims, but the retailer does. So if the retailer issues this claim approval form, then does the brand need to issue a TC to the retailer?
I can take this one if you want. So essentially, anytime a TC is requested from a certified supplier, it's not necessarily a requirement, but it's something that the certified supplier is eligible and should issue a TC. So it's always possible for a certified supplier to issue a TC to anybody, whether the buyer is certified or not. So that's kind of, if the retailer is requesting a TC from the brand, it's not required in our CCS 3.0, but that's kind of up to the brand's discretion of the relationship with the retailer where they're eligible. And if it's asked for, it kind of should be issued and it can be issued. So it's not something that's required in terms of the claims approval process. The claims approval process, the brand will work with their certification body and they'll apply based on their scope certificate and the product listings that they're wanting to have covered on the claims. But it's not necessary to have a TC for that. But kind of separately, if the TC is being asked, it can and should be issued, but is not a requirement of the CCS 3.0.
Thanks for answering that, Callie. Looks like right now our Q&A box is empty. I thought since we have some time left, I will mention something that I get asked about often is, and this is for a question for you, Steph, but I get asked about component claims a lot, which it was kind of mentioned during the presentation, but I didn't know if you wanted to maybe go into, how component claims work compared to, a full product claim.
Sure. So component claims under our standards claims policy are allowed, and they actually go through the same exact process as any type of product, full product related claims. So that is, what do I want to say about it? So I do want to mention that components do have a specific definition, and trims and accessories, those type of things are not included in the overall weight calculation for the product or the component. So you don't need to worry about those type of things when you're talking about claimed components. But otherwise, if you're talking about the outer shell of a jacket or a different shoelaces in a sneaker or something along those lines, then as long as it's easily identifiable as separate from other parts of the product itself, then it should qualify to be claimed separately. And in those type of claims, you would specify exactly what you're talking about. So you would say the outer shell of this jacket contains 100% RDS certified, or no, RCS certified polyester, something along those lines. So you do need to call that out in the claim specifically, but otherwise the process is the same for getting it approved. And if you work with your certification body to identify a component, they'll let you know whether or not it does qualify to make claims. I hope that helps.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Steph. I just get questions about that a lot. So I figured, might as well speak on it while we have time right now. I got another question about certification and that process. It's pretty specific, so feel free to jump in, any of you guys. But it says that they are currently speaking to, I believe, a certification body, and they mentioned that to get certified, they would need to obtain an ISO/IEC 17065 first, in addition to our standards. Is that correct?
I can take that one. I recommend for specific cases like this to circle back with a certification body and our assurance team if there are any questions. Principally, there are no prerequisites that you would have to meet in order to require or to comply with our standards, as long as you can meet the requirements within the standard.
Great. Thank you for that, Trini. And it looks like our Q&A box is once again empty. So obviously, if anyone else has any questions, please type them in the Q&A portion. Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to touch on while we have the time or before the webinar is done? Okay, it looks like we had another question come in during that time, so I will go ahead and ask that. It says, when a brand receives a scope certificate, do they also need a transaction certificate? So this is about receiving.
So the purpose of the scope certificate and the transaction certificate, they have different purposes in the sense. So if you're looking at a scope certificate, let's say within your supply chain, I'm guessing that question might come from a brand. So if you are looking at a scope certificate, the scope certificate will tell you that the entity itself is certified and eligible to sell on the standards terms for a specific range of products. So the scope certificate gives you information about the certified organization you're buying from. The transaction certificate is tied to the product itself as it travels through the supply chain. So ideally, from your direct seller, you will want to look at both the scope certificate to ensure that they are eligible, ideally. You will also want to ask for a transaction certificate to ensure what you are receiving is actually what you thought you bought. An add-on to that question is that we also sometimes receive is, do I have to go back all the way to the very beginnings of the supply chain and collect all the scope and transaction certificates? And it is not necessary, because when we think back to the visual, a volume reconciliation will have been made at every step as the product travels through the supply chain. So if a certification body has issued a transaction certificate for the previous transaction, you can rest assured that a volume reconciliation has happened way earlier in the supply chain. We know some brands or some entities like to collect for the entire supply chain, and that is okay, but it is technically not absolutely necessary depending on your level of risk you're willing to take on.
Great, thanks for answering that, Trini. During that time, we had another question come in about our Track It system. It says, I have read about Textile Exchange's Track It at your webpage. Is that a system that we are able to handle TCs no matter what certification body we use?
The quick answer is in the long run, yes. However, we are still in the process of building out Track It and are hoping to have more information by the time our conference comes around. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Thanks, Trini. All right, it looks like our question and answer box is empty yet again. So thank you everyone for all of those really great questions that came in. And I think Callie answered maybe one or two more via chat that were a little bit more maybe specific. So feel free to check those out in the answered section of the Q&A box. But for now, we might wait a few minutes to see if any other last minute questions come in. Yeah, we appreciate all the great questions. I had a question that came in that says, can you send the questions to us as well? Yeah, we can figure out a way to potentially get these questions to the hands. We do send a recording of the webinar, which will have all these answered questions because most of them were answered live. So yeah, we will. Yeah, go ahead, Trini.
We also have an FAQ on our website, so I encourage participants to look around our website, to play around with the standards landing page to see which options, which documents, which questions might already be answered there, including in the FAQ as well.
Yeah, that is a great point. Thanks, Trini. All right. Yeah, if anyone has any more last minute questions before this webinar is done, feel free to insert them. We are obviously happy to answer anything and everything you guys have about CCS and labeling. Looks like it is still empty for now, but we will take a few minutes. And I know Callie has answered a few yet again, so yeah, feel free to check out those answers in the answer box.
Wonderful. Confirmation that everything is clear. That is great.
Yes,
Thank you, James.
Yes, we love to hear that, right?
Mhm.
Awesome.
Great. I think if there are no other questions, I think we can give you 10 minutes of your morning, afternoon, evening back.
Yes.
Back to you, Rose.
Thank you to our speakers. Wonderful job today. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. As a friendly reminder, the presentation and links to the recording will be sent to all of those who have registered. That concludes our webinar for today. Thank you. Goodbye.